Hello, everyone, and welcome to our creative technology session at the Festival of Innovation. I'm really excited for our conversation today, and joining me we have Mark Stutzman, Chief Technology Officer at AREA15, Matt Quinn, Director at Squint, and Chris Michaels from Chris Michaels Digital Advisory. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me.
Hi there, lovely to be here.
So, Mark, I wondered if you could just tell us a bit about the role that technology plays in AREA15 and sort of what you are working on at the moment.
Yeah, so AREA15 is kind of a combination of technology and art and experiences, and so technology is kind of one of the legs of that stool, right? So, and we often talk about kind of the invisible technology and the visible technology to the guest. And also I talk about kind of the boring tech and the exciting tech, but the boring tech is everything that runs the facility, from the low voltage to the audio visual and the network infrastructure and all that good stuff, as well as things like transactional systems and ticketing and integration between all of those systems in our experiences. And then the really fun stuff is kind of all of these new and exciting attractions and experiences that we're building, many of which we actually build internally or with a partner. And so we're very kind of bullish about story integration throughout the venue, and we're doing much more of that today. We really like the idea of owning this IP and continuing to develop it, both on the technology and the story side. So from our perspective, technology should be this kind of enabler of great immersive experiences. It shouldn't be the experience. It should be kind of some of the frosting and the foundational elements that make all of these things work and seem like magic to the guest. We're not always successful, but that's the goal every time, is to kind of make it feel like magic. So hopefully that answered your question, Alice.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Matt, could you tell us a bit more about Squint, what you're doing at the moment, and also kind of what your focus is?
Yeah, Squint has been around for about 20 years. And I mean, just maybe to the previous question, technology has always been at the heart of what we do, but we are filmmakers. It just so happened to be the film set was inside of a computer, because we started in the sort of architectural filmmaking category. Now it's pretty commoditized as visualization, which isn't something we really do anymore, but we still use all those tools to tell stories. So it's a pretty traditional approach of storyboarding and creative treatments and developing a narrative. And about 10 years ago, we started to apply that to physical space, so immersive environments and specifically museums. And there's a degree of knowledge transfer that comes, but the process for us is the same, where it's everything scripted and storyboarded. And we think about it as a narrative journey, and it can be linear and non-linear, but you're still sort of you're being delivered a story. But technology is a massive part of it. I mean, we do shoot live action, but most of the time we're in a studio, especially now with volumetric studios and using gaming engines and using sort of virtual environments to create an atmosphere comes very naturally to us. As much as we like to go out in the field with a camera, we tend to blend the two spaces together, and it helps to tell. I mean, our specialism is telling stories about places that don't really exist, so either in the past or in the future. So we have to recreate the world in which we tell a story, and we use technology to do that.
I really like that both of you are sort of going, technology is this really important tool, but actually, it's got to be seamless. It's got to be sort of the story first. Chris, you have worked with quite a few big museums and kind of looking at technology and the visitor experience. Can you talk about any projects you've worked on recently, and also, how powerful technology can be in your experience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in all of the work I do, so I work as a consultant, as an advisor, and a researcher. All of that work is about the kind of the world that's changing and the world that's changing because of what technology is doing to it, and that's the kind of the perspective I lead with on all the work I do. Working with museums, creative organizations, we are, of course, at a kind of inflection point where certain new technologies are making big, sudden, and unexpected and kind of unpredictable impacts on the world. So one of the projects I did this year was working with UCL, one of the biggest universities in the world, Goldsmiths, one of the great creative universities in London, Alternet Global, this kind of great new immersive venue of a kind we could barely have imagined even kind of 2 or 3 years ago, and a creative technology business called Cisco. What we asked simply was a bunch of brilliantly talented students to make an immersive experience using generative AI in a week. And really it was a kind of experiment to see kind of what happens to visualization because of generative AI tools, and how can it kind of speed up process and create new process. And it was intentionally rough and kind of half finished, but actually they got an incredible way incredibly quickly, and none of what they were doing could possibly have been done 18 months ago. And so we see ourselves constantly this kind of very much now on the bounds of new types of creative possibility that are just being shaped in real time all around us. So it's a super exciting moment. It's quite scary in lots of ways. None of us quite know where it's going to end up, but we are kind of living through this very kind of big transitional moment. It's exciting, terrifying, but important, and we've got to kind of get our heads around what it's all going to mean.
And how do you sort of juggle working out, what technology is actually going to be good for the visitor experience, what technology is going to take off? Like, how do you explore that?
I mean, my way has always been to not try and think about that first question too much, but just to try stuff out. When I was deputy director at the National Gallery, I was responsible for digital transformation, and my approach to it was to set up an innovation lab that allowed us to experiment as early as possible with emerging things. None of us are these guys might be clever enough. I'm not clever enough to tell you what the future is going to, technology-enabled future is going to look like in 5 to 7 years' time. And so when people kept asking it to me, I was just, I don't know, but let's kind of try some stuff and find out. And that's the practical truth of kind of new forms of creativity, new forms of technology, is you only can really kind of get a sense of direction from them by doing stuff as early as possible, so that as things start to shape out for the future, you've got enough of a handle to have an intelligent opinion at each point down the line. And at the point when you're ready for some serious adoption of the kind that Mark's got at AREA15, where things have got to work day by day, then you've done enough kind of R&D and innovation to kind of make good decisions at the right point in time.
So Mark, how do you kind of work with that R&D to make sure that the technology works for the visitors, because they have high expectations coming into AREA15?
Yeah, I think there's kind of 2 different questions. The first is, how do we make it work so it's concrete and bulletproof? The second is, how do we kind of determine what's going to be engaging kind of long term? And I wanted to kind of answer that second part of the question first. I mean, we really see ourselves as a black box, as a collection of experiences, many of which we curate, like Meow Wolf and other tenants, many of which that we develop. And so what we're not doing is building, a Star Wars galactic star cruiser experience that is going to be crushed under its own weight and is so insanely expensive. Probably one of the most amazing immersive experiences ever built in the history of immersive experiences, but was not financially viable. We really try to be modular and build lots of small, interesting experiences, and we can test them frequently. We can determine what the guests really like, and we can expand from there. So if we find a type of experience that's really engaging and the guests love, we can continue to enhance it. We can bring out variations of it. But that modularity is really critical for us, because we can plug something in, and if it doesn't work, we haven't spent millions on it. We've spent a reasonable amount of money. We're okay with the risk, and we can pull it out, and we have something in the wings ready to test again. And that flexibility is what's really been kind of key to our success. Same thing with the technical infrastructure, and the way I kind of guarantee things work is, when we started AREA15, I didn't do a single contract with a vendor that was more than 12 months, because I was building a modular infrastructure. I knew that we had to test everything. I knew that I was going to remove big chunks and plug in other providers. We use everything as a service. We don't really use anything in the venue out of box. So we build on top of APIs. We build our own guest experience. I think the only thing that might not be the case there is our POS. We kind of use that mostly out of the box, but we have customized it significantly and hooked it into all of our other systems. So if you're playing one of our experiences like Particle Quest, which is this kind of augmented reality experience where you go around and look at different art in the venue and you solve these puzzles and you learn about the backstory of Area 15. If you complete that, you're actually getting loyalty points that we're updating in our POS system in real time. So that integration, a guest never sees it, but it works and it continues to improve the guest experience because all of a sudden they're like, oh, where did I get these loyalty points from? Well, you got them from Particle Quest. And we kind of do that throughout the experience at Area 15.
And Matt, at Squint, does the technology you use come from the demand from your customer, your client, or are you sort of suggesting things to your clients? Is it a mixture of both?
No, we're naturally curious in the tech and emerging tech. So I think as a culture, we just kind of like to play around in it. And sort of what Mark and Chris said, I think more places having innovation labs or having an arrangement to do that would be beneficial for everyone, because we do get, we get asked to work on a lot of big institutions, but those institutions want to just, sign a couple of contracts. And it makes it hard to innovate too far because they're looking for sort of like for like, proposals. And if we can get into a situation where we're on a short sprint and we're innovating pretty fast and trying things out, I think it's better in the long run. While it's nice to have some big giant contract, not really in our benefit to work on something for 3 years where you're not entirely sure the outcome, and the client is, feeling like they made a big investment. And I don't know, it puts a lot of it scares people off a little bit to go further with this tech. One thing we found helpful is sort of virtual twins creating. We can just really spin up an idea in a virtual environment and kind of just look around in it. I don't think these are particularly good experiences for an audience, but for a client and a small design team to put on a headset and look around in a kind of a future venue where we can make all the media move and use sound and atmospheric. So we find that to be very helpful in helping people kind of move beyond the 2D into a 3D. And just the previous point, we're always trying to inform someone of something or, provide information, provide a story, provide a narrative. The tech should sort of disappear. One of the projects we were going to speak about, Abrahamic House in Abu Dhabi, it's very much about exploring different religions. It has to feel very personal. It has to feel spiritual and have depth. There's a ton of technology taking place, which I hope you don't think about when you're going through that space. It's probably a good example of that.
Yeah, and that is actually one of our award entries, so people can go and find out more about that in our showcase. So do go look at it. It's a really incredible project. If we move on to some top trends that you're all seeing, Mark, what trends are you seeing in the market?
There's only one trend in the market, and that's AI, right? It's eating up the world. And I think I'm sure everyone on the call has been using AI for years. I mean, we've been using machine learning in our data warehouses and doing predictive analytics, and we all experience it every day with social algorithms. But generative AI and large language models have just taken over. And I'm personally incredibly excited about it. I'm also scared to death about it because I do see the pace at which we're developing, and I think as a species, we should all be very scared about the pace of development. But in the meantime, for a guy who makes his living building things with technology, it is an extraordinary moment to be alive. It's from a generative perspective, I mean, we are using it for everything from theming of new physical spaces to concepting stories to kind of social posts. I mean, it's unbelievable, but the kind of width and depth of how quickly it's permeated kind of all of our businesses is extraordinary. I've been maintaining kind of a database of tools and systems that we want to test, and the backlog is so incredibly long at this point, just because there's so many solutions coming out so quickly. But we're using it in marketing. We're using it in computer vision in the venue. We're using it to design and create new ideas. It's extraordinary. And the biggest annoyance to me is I don't have time to test it all. And I think the other challenge I have is, how do I measure the actual improvement by using some of these tools? Because it's what you see is there's this curve where it actually takes staff longer to do things as they start to use some of these tools. And then all of a sudden, it's this just crazy drop in the amount of time once they actually get comfortable with some of this new technology. So it's worth kind of getting over that initial hurdle. But there's so many priorities and so many things to test. So.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly saw with our innovation awards a huge number of AI in some of those entries. There was sort of an AI visitor conversational interface. They used AI to in a museum exhibition to have interviews with Holocaust survivors. Someone used AI to create content for a water show. There was the Cisco AI challenge, a dream tapestry at the Dali Museum. There was kind of quite a lot in there. So it really does feel like it's sort of permeating the industry a lot more. Chris, obviously you worked on that challenge that you mentioned at the beginning with Cisco and others. How do you see kind of generative AI influencing the future?
Well, I mean, again, just think how fast this is changing. I mean, all those examples you described, actually the majority of them were probably created using ChatGPT, possibly even something kind of preceding this kind of current wave, right? Because to get from all the way through that development phase to the large scale public launches, this is a slightly earlier models. The Cisco challenge, because we were doing something short term and fast, we could just use the most up-to-date stuff. But there's now a whole nother wave to come, right? So even just this week, I was just reading this morning, there's an exhibition just opening in New Zealand this weekend, which is all generative AI interactive with the participants. So you go through some kind of narrative experience where it's kind of responding to you physically walking through the space and live creating the kind of the artistic responses to you as you go. So we're so much in the kind of early stages of this that all of this should just be taken as like a kind of R&D experiment, right? That what actually is going to happen in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it's going to be so infinitely more sophisticated than we can really see properly now. So, there's a lot more to come. I think the other thing to do is to start thinking what's on the other side of it. Now, it sounds stupid, but if any of you have read Mr. Suleiman's book, the founder of DeepMind, the big kind of AI bit of Google, he's already well developing towards kind of the model that comes after generative AI, and he calls it kind of interactive AI, which is kind of the bit where everything links together. So all this stuff's acting relatively independently, doing visual transformations, sonic transformations. It's the kind of bit where everything kind of comes together and kind of amplifies and elevates beyond that. And so, again, we are very much at an early stage of this. Ultimately, what the constraint at this stage is kind of where it's being displayed, interacted with, which is primarily screen-based spaces. Really, most of what we're seeing here is actually generative AI producing content for screen-based locations. The fact is, LED panels are now, below $1,000 per square meter, and that's why we're seeing places like the Outernet, places, of that type emerging all over the world, because it's fairly cheap to build them physically, and then presumably what generative AI is now is kind of filling them with content. But there is also a kind of seemingly a device world that might emerge that's not screen-based. There's this thing called Humane Pin that one of the kind of Apple iPhone designers is doing, which is kind of slightly spooky kind of thing that you attach to your lapel that kind of scans the world around you, the AI chatbot. So there might be a kind of post-screen experience to come out of this that could take an entirely different path, and what that means creatively. So we've got to be very open and flexible about where the model goes yet. Ultimately, we're still in a very screen-dominated space. It might be something beyond screen that actually comes out of this and is super interesting creatively.
Yeah, so don't kind of become too fixed on what you think it can do, and just sort of let the technology kind of take you wherever it can go.
Just keep participant, I think, is the thing to me. It's like, as Mark says, you've got this backlog. You're never going to get through the backlog of every single startup kind of coming out all at the same time, but understanding the trends and being kind of playing in the different pools as they emerge, it's the only way to do it, because thinking there's a fixed answer yet, it's far too early.
Matt, you've been working with AI Squint for quite a while, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to Mark's earlier point, I mean, if you were creating a forest in a virtual environment, usually 10,000 trees, so you are using these sort of prompts in the work and within the software. It's only in the last couple of years. I mean, it's obviously seems to have gotten much more powerful, but also, direct to consumer seems to be the thing that's really changed. If you're leveraging things like OpenAI, we're still succumbed to like the craziness last weekend where suddenly the whole company might go down and you've tied in all of your work into some, so this is a problem with sort of building on top of other people's technology. But yes, cultural spaces are going to be the ones that start to experiment with this, and because there's lower risk to it, but trying to do this on a bigger scale, you get into a little bit of trouble in terms of clients wanting to rely on things they can't wholly control. But so we're probably not using it as much as we could in terms of the final output, but certainly in the whole process of how we create media, how we create content. It's through everything. We're very much fully adopting it in all of our work, because we want the work to get better, not because we necessarily want to use less people or cut corners. Just wherever it can help us to develop a storyboard quicker or more personalized to the client, so moving away from mood imagery and into things that feel much more relevant to the sort of concept at hand, and probably less using other people's work to show new work. It's always maybe been a little bit of a problem in our industry. And then I always think about, go to the sort of the sensational Disney rides, and the thing they're constantly using holograms, which is still like an 1860 technology, right? So there's still some fairly clever magic, let's say, that we use in the immersive environment. There's not new technology, and projection mapping onto live surfaces and moving surfaces is still a brilliant way to, I don't know if you would fully call that non-screen based, but it does feel different. Like it feels more tangible and more interesting. And using AI to better motion track and be able to actually make objects come to life by combining digital media through projection, I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in that space. And gaming engines really help us to do that, to map real world environments in real time, mix in tech content. So we're using it to push ourselves further, not necessarily to cut corners, I would say, is my main point.
I think that's really important, because I think with kind of the explosion of chat GPT, like a lot of people in this industry, I think, were concerned that no one's going to need the creatives anymore. So actually, as you say, it's about working with it to make your end result better, but you still need the human there guiding it, don't you, Matt?
Yeah. And I mean, I think we got maybe quick to recognize when we see something written by ChatGPT, or, these things are going to improve very, very quickly. And I don't know how much that matters anymore, but the human touch I always think about, I'm getting made fun of for this, but I always think about architectural model making, where people when they see a maquette, you know, even when we went to IAPA, right? Actually, the coolest thing are like models of roller coasters. It's just the coolest. And I think it's because I think as a human, you relate to the fact that another human put that little piece and component in place. There's something when you identify the human in it, it does elevate the experience. So I think that's really important, and we shouldn't forget how important that is. I mean, you want to feel there's a human hand involved, there's a human touch to the story that's unfolding in front of you or the experience you're having.
I'm seeing a lot of personalization within the industry. I think the theme park side has kind of been doing this for quite a while, but I think even sort of cultural spaces are starting to do it as well. Mark, do you see a way of AI kind of aiding this personalization? Is there anything else that you think technology-wise this is going to really push that forwards?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I think Chris touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think the most interesting thing is that you can be kind of generating real-time personalized experiences per guest, all within kind of guardrails, at least of our venue. I mean, one of the things that was kind of lucky for me was it was kind of blue sky when we started Area 15. There was no technology developed at all. And I come from a software background. And so I treated this physical venue like it was a digital platform. I mean, I didn't want to buy into like any of what people consider kind of traditional holes and data collection of a physical venue versus a digital platform. And so we really thought a lot about how do we do that? And we're not fully there, but I think when you add in kind of location tracking and sensors and uniquely identify guests with their permission, you can really create these extraordinary stories. And I think Matt brought up kind of projection mapping. I think projection mapping combined with generative AI, combined with personalization within kind of, let's call it a universal rule set for what our story goes in what direction, what our story means, creates like just this explosion of potential for us and for everyone else who's in this world. But I think that's certainly going to be a big push for us, combining kind of the data that we have about guests, tracking them physically in the venue, and dynamically creating these kind of projection mapped experiences and digital signage experiences, etc. Because digital signage doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be just about how do you get from A to B. It can be a really interesting and dynamic experience for the guest, where they're talking to a virtual avatar who's entertaining and informative and guiding them through the experience. So yeah, we're very excited about the possibilities there.
Yeah, we spoke with eTrenolin actually in our Blue Sky category session, and they have an AI guide to take you through their immersive dining experience, which I think is really cool. Chris, how do you see kind of personalization going forwards for cultural spaces?
Well, I mean, look, for an awful lot of cultural spaces, getting the raw building blocks of CRM sorted out is still the mission, right? So,
replacing those vacuum tubes.
Fundamental transformations still to be done, but for those who've done it, I mean, to me, all the creative opportunity the guys just talked about is right, but I think there's also a big piece about what Web3 and digital collectibles can offer there, right? So right back when the NFT explosion happened 2 years ago, I did this kind of case study with one of the startups kind of looking at the space, and it became obvious very fast that there's a whole piece around kind of member and audience loyalty and engagement that digital collectibles are very well placed to fix, but which requires a kind of technology stack integration that doesn't quite exist yet. And at that point, a kind of Web3 user experience that certainly didn't exist yet. But as and when it comes, the ability to kind of reward, engage, build loyalty from that kind of that Web3 collectibles piece is going to be really useful to a lot of venues that kind of struggle to know how to kind of signify the value of people's presence, the value of people's return engagement. You know, for every venue in the world, it's all about getting people not just the first time, but the second, third, and fourth time. You know, that's where you really build businesses that last. And that Web3 space has an awful lot to offer there. And it's coming closer. So, I mean, I'm an advisor to this brilliant startup called Nimi that's just really focused on that space. But not many people have kind of got that yet, that's where the opportunity is. But it then needs integration with the CRM vendors, who are kind of a slightly, you know, a previous wave of technology. So there's work still to be done over the 2 to 3 years ahead. But if it can be done, it can unlock an awful lot of stuff. And then building the things Mark's talking about, you know, live data, you know, kind of real-time experience that sits on top. You've suddenly got a really powerful kind of 21st century experience that potentially lots of people can access, because it's going to be relatively commodified. And so, you know, again, it's exciting times ahead, but there's lots of hard technology work to be done in the meantime to get there.
And Matt, what are you seeing with personalization as a trend?
Well, I'm surprised how many venues aren't, or even in the attractions business, aren't doing what Mark just described and Chris described. You know, so there's an enormous opportunity in terms of tracking and personalization and building on experience and collecting data and improving. Just you know, with conversations with people, I was just surprised how little of that seems to be happening. One space where we're actually really interested in is merch. So using Gen AI to create customized merchandise for artists, and it feeling like, to a user, there's infinite sort of variations on something, but actually you're containing it. You know, you're putting pretty specific guardrails on the output. I don't know. That's one thing we're trying to find partners that want to explore that with us, because we know we can do a lot with it, and it seems to be, I don't know, lacking to some degree. So it's personalization for you, but also you share with your friends, and you kind of can create your own customized version of something within an artistic bubble parameters, but it feels wholly to you. And then you crack that, you can start to open it up into other types of experiences. But I swear, like, us finding the people that we can do this with is the hardest bit, just because of IP and, I don't know, legal entanglements and not owning certain rights. So that's where we get stuck. And we're fairly big studio, so we need, you know, it doesn't mean we don't like working with small organizations, but we kind of need to do things at a bigger scale to have an impact.
I'm curious, Chris, do you see any other trends kind of coming out at the moment, aside from AI?
I mean, AI isn't everything. I mean, I said it feels like it is because it's dominated the news agenda so heavily. I mean, exactly as Matt said, you know, the potential of projection is still actually really being unlocked at scale a lot of the time. I remain super. If we were going to see one more kind of stab at the next year, we wait to see what kind of AR does. You know, you've got the new Apple headset coming out, the Meta one's just come out. You know, it starts to introduce kind of at scale augmented reality experience from a consumer point of view. There's really interesting there's a lot of infrastructure still to build to make AR work brilliantly well in the real world. But I mean, just last week, there's a new startup called Darabase that's a kind of augmented reality property rights platform. And that sounds really kind of dull, but it's a building block, right? Because ultimately, if you're going to have an augmented world overlaid on the real physical world, you don't want to have a poster up for Coca-Cola and then you hold your phone up to it and it shows Pepsi, right? Otherwise, the whole advertising ecosystem kind of falls apart there and then. So, you know, real world property owners and the owners of public realm spaces need to be able to kind of manage their digital virtual rights, and those building blocks are still being built. So, you know, there's a huge amount more to come in the AR space. As I said, think something like this kind of humane pin, which pretends a kind of post-screen world. There's an awful lot of criticism of it, and quite a lot to be criticized. but there's clearly a lot happening in the devices space that is looking at what might happen there. And, you know, again, that's enormously creatively, has enormous creative potential, you know, to not be thinking through the holding of a mobile phone as the kind of access point to digital worlds. Isn't, you know, again, it's interesting whichever direction it takes.
Yeah, I think offers lots of possibilities for people, and maybe just kind of explore what those possibilities are. Matt, what kind of trends are you seeing? Where do you see the future going?
I would say I'm much more excited about Humane than I am the Apple glasses or the potential of that. I'm surprised it wasn't the other way around, that what we saw from Apple would have been a pin that, you know, projected a screen onto your hand, because that feels much more where things are going, and that putting a device, as I said before, like we find utility in that for sure, but and I'm never gonna like underestimate Apple like that. That would be stupid. So it's curious to see how that unfolds. I'm more of a spectator when it comes to that. Of course, we will be developing content for it and trying to, you know, get clients excited by the potential of it, because why wouldn't you? I do think that things that are non-screen based are definitely where the future, that sort of digital layer that Chris touched on. You go into a space and that space has been mapped digitally so that it interacts with you. So using tracking, you walk up to something, there is some interaction with you that is some way personalized. Like, I think that's a far more interesting place to go to, and it uses all that technology we talked about before. You know, you're literally creating digital twins of a space. You're using projection or other digital media to create content. You're personalizing that content for the individual. It doesn't get boring, you know, so it's terrible if you have this giant wall of content and, you know, it just plays over and over again. Eventually you get sick of, you know, hearing the same music, whatever. So being able to generate new content or change it or personalize it or make it more dynamic, I think anything that enhances our world is much more interesting than, you know, technology or screens for the sake of, well, I didn't know what to do with this wall, so I put a bunch of monitors on it. And now, hey, can you put something here? Because that tends to be the brief we'll get. You know, we ordered a 30-foot screen. Now, you know, go nuts. And you're like, well, it doesn't really work. It doesn't actually work that way. You have to sort of develop the story first. So I'd like to see more of that, people thinking about how we can bring spaces to life rather than going, we put a bunch of tech in here because that's what everyone's interested in.
Mark, is this something that AREA15 are looking at with AR and kind of mapping spaces, or is that top secret?
No, it's not top secret. First I want to say I think the pin is very cool too, and I think we will see it from Apple as they acquire Humane and integrate it into the watch, which will have millions and millions of users across the globe, right? It's kind of called Siri already. They just need to connect Siri to OpenAI or Hugging Face, and they're good to go. Yeah. Look, we love mixed reality. I mean, mixed reality is a winner. I've never been a big fan of VR. I find it kind of cold and not personal. There was a moment during COVID where I thought, okay, there is an opportunity for this metaverse idea. And then once we all were able to get out of our houses, I said, you know, screw the metaverse. Let's get back and do things in person. But I find the opportunities with mixed reality are just incredible. Like we've built multiple experiences using AR. We've built experiences using projection mapping. We've used experiences that use computer vision to track your emotional state as we're asking you questions, and we dynamically generate art on a 10-foot cranium that sticks out of the wall. I think what we do try to do is hide the fact that you're kind of walking through the venue looking at a telephone or an iPhone. and we try to help the guest with that suspended disbelief. So, Particle Quest, for example, is a mixed reality experience based on art triggers that are around the venue. And so we actually created these masks that you hold up, and they're cool, and they look kind of cyberpunk, but you're really using an iPhone as your viewport through that thing. But it helps you kind of forget the fact that you're looking at a phone. I do love the idea of kind of mixed reality with projection mapping. I think Disney's starting to do that a little bit in their parks, which is interesting, and personalized. I don't want people walking around with a phone, but I do want the magic of these incremental layers you can add on top of any physical experience. When you think about, we do a lot of EDM concerts. I cannot imagine anything better than adding a fantasy festival layer on top of what is already happening at an EDM show, whether it's an AR drone show that's happening, doing things that you can't do in reality, to magical beasts that are flying around. I think there's just so many opportunities there. But I have personally really been waiting for something like a pair of glasses that we all don't look like nerds wearing the Google glasses, but are kind of socially acceptable and help provide that kind of heads-up display in AR. That's gonna be the thing that opens the door for us to do all kinds of magical stuff throughout the district when you're outside, social gaming experiences, all kinds of stuff, without people going like this and looking at their phone and tripping, trying to experience that mixed reality.
I think there's a note worth taking on that, which is that the socially acceptable bit still feels like it's a way off. I mean, the last week, there's this Canadian academic who's had his kind of head augmented with a kind of camera and data sensor, and he went to a football match in Italy, and the police beat the hell out of him for they couldn't quite. He was trying to explain, they weren't speaking the same language, and they're like, "What is that on your head? Why are you filming us?" And he tried, and anyway, he got smashed up. I mean, the social acceptability bit is a ways away, but it needs the magic device, right? Before 2008, none of us realized that walking around with a phone in our hand would be. We may have done it on BlackBerry, but we didn't spend our entire lives doing it. So the social trigger of the kind of the killer device that opens up is still very much to come.
Yeah.
So if we change tack a little bit and sort of look at challenges, Mark, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing right now?
My challenge is always the same thing, just volume. We're a big venue, and we're doing big things, and we're expanding another 40 acres with District 2 at Area 15 to create a whole immersive district. But we are still a small team. And so we're trying to accomplish a lot in a little time, and we still want it to feel magical for the guest. And so prioritization is challenging, really understanding what's going to have kind of the highest ROI on what we're trying to accomplish, what's going to be the most magical for the guest. It's not new. It's been my challenge for my entire career. I'm like a 30-year tech startup guy, and so we all deal with this, but it doesn't seem to ever go away. No matter what project management and prioritization exercises you go through, there's just a backlog that's this big and active projects that are this big. And so that's my biggest challenge. I don't know if that's true for the rest of the folks at Area 15, but it's what I contend with daily.
Matt, what's your biggest challenge?
It is finding those great projects that have some scale to them, because our industry is fairly secretive. No one talks about anything until it's about to open. And the sort of institutional museum world is slow and cumbersome and fairly bureaucratic. So whereas some of the most interesting work can happen there, it's such a slow, it's actually quite high risk to us to do because it takes so long. The smaller, more dynamic might be constrained by other, they have other constraints on them. So we have to kind of find this whole mix of these types of, I mean, this is my own personal, as a commercial director, like looking for where the great opportunities are that excite our team and we can bring great value to a client. It is challenging. They're hard to find. It's very much personal relationships and just getting to know what's happening where, and it just you never feel like you're on top of it. You're always hearing about something you've never heard of before. And every day there's some new museum that's opening or some nursery friends are like, how did I not know about that? So that's information. I have information overload and not the right information. That tends to be my challenge. But there's great work out. There's great people doing amazing things. I mean, it's like, you go to somewhere like AREA15, or you go to even I had the opportunity to go to Disney Hollywood and see a lot of these rides. I was quite blown away by how innovative they were. And I know lots of people who've worked on that will never ever be able to say they worked on it. This is also another shame. And so there's a lot of things I wish would change in our business. Like, it'd be a little bit more nimble. It would be a little bit more open. It would be like, I don't know, there's a whole weird inside secretive kind of disruption that needs to be, I think, it disrupted on many levels.
Yeah. Chris, what's your biggest challenge?
Well, I mean, most of my professional life really is writing kind of strategic and/or business cases for change. And usually that's about kind of adoption of some new technology-driven thing. And that's getting harder because the scale of impact of AI is very hard to kind of put a limit on. It could be this big or it could be this big. And so certainly crafting reasonable numbers with the economists I work with, you don't quite know exactly where to put it, right? And actually then usually by the time you've written the case, that change has already happened. So you're kind of you're out of date before you even got there. So this is just a very particularly difficult moment to kind of judge impact. And if your job relies on judging impact professionally, you got to admit that you're in a kind of slightly unknown zone at the moment. So again, it's exciting, but we just need the next year or two to kind of play out a little bit to get some certainty about kind of reasonable direction.
Well, that has been a really fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and watching. And also thank you to Mark, Chris and Matt. I think it was very interesting and hope everyone took away some helpful pieces of information. We are going to announce the winners of our Creative Technology Innovation Award category next. So do stick around to watch those. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alice.
And now, the winners of the Creative Technology Innovation Awards 2023. Third place, Draw Me the Planet from Crystal. Second place, Sphere Immersive Sound powered by Holoplot at Sphere Las Vegas. And first place, SeaWorld Yas Island Abu Dhabi One Ocean Hub from Thinkwell, a Tate company. Congratulations to all of the winners.